Today is episode 31 with Dr. B.
Welcome to the Harness Your ADHD Power podcast. If you're looking for a fresh perspective and actionable steps on hot topics from focus to follow through to self-management and more, you are in the right place. Welcome your host, innovative educator, coach, and psychotherapist, Dr. B.
Hey, ADDers. I am so glad that you could join me for today's podcast episode. And guess what? It's time for another change to the format. The episodes have been getting a bit long, so I'm moving back to the sweet spot of roughly 30 minutes. That means cutting out some of the repetitive content in order to keep the episodes focused on great content, stories, action steps, and a favorite quote of mine. I appreciate all your suggestions and your input so I can consider everything and provide you with the best of me in the ways that are best for you too. Just because you can speak doesn't mean you can communicate skillfully or say what you intend to convey. Just because you know the words doesn't mean that you're using them skillfully. Just because you get everything out that you want to say doesn't mean that it's received as you intended. And if you have beliefs about not wanting to hurt anyone's feelings, then you're already setting yourself up not to say what's on your mind because you'll be focused on censoring yourself and not focused on what you want to convey. Some of the goals of this episode are to provide you with a basic understanding of communication, what it is and it isn't, what your responsibility is as the communicator, and what your responsibility is as the listener, the role that boundaries play in communication, how to communicate assertively, skillfully, and say what you intend with greater confidence and ease of expression. And of course, there will be some action steps that you can begin to take today. A small piece of information here about how executive function skills tie in with communication. You're going to need the ability to hold on to your thoughts as you're expressing them, to regulate your emotional state as you're expressing yourself, even if you're worked up about what it is that you have to say, and prioritize the flow of your communication. And if you're lacking any of these skills, these are your pre-skills to learn, practice, and master so that you can move on to more skillful communication and be successful. There's also a tie-in from episode 29 about assumptions, expectations, shame, and guilt. You weren't born with these skills to be an effective communicator. They have to be learned. You were born with the capacity to develop them, but not with them there and ready to be used. If you speak, you had to learn to talk. You started by repeating words, forming sentences, and so on. Eventually you were talking, which doesn't necessarily mean you were communicating skillfully, just that you were talking. Communication is interactive. It's an exchange of information. People attempt to understand one another from what's said in the exchange as well as what isn't. The word communicate comes from the Latin, which means to share. It's an act of conveying an intended meaning from one person to another through the use of mutually understood rules, sounds, signs, symbols, and gestures. Human communication is unique for its use of abstract language, meaning communication isn't always clear-cut. No lie. Here's a quick overview of what happens with communication. Typically, there's a reason or a motivation for you to say something. You have to compose the message mentally and then translate it into the form that it's going to be expressed in, like written or spoken words. You need to consider your tonal qualities because they influence your communication, as do your facial expressions. Sometimes the receiver's facial expressions are going to influence you when you're speaking, and you have to be mindful of that possible influence as well. Then the receiver has to decode or understand, or at least try to, what it is that you're saying or trying to convey correctly. In other words, they have to interpret and make sense out of what comes out of your mouth. That's a lot going on. Plus, with both literal and inferential communication, literal being what you say is what you mean, and inferential being what you say has layers of implied meanings. It is amazing that any of us are as understood as we are. If there are any skills missing along the way for you, either as the speaker or the receiver, there's going to most likely be a breakdown in the communication. And if you and the other both feel that you're right and assume that you have all the skills on board that are necessary in order to transmit or receive accurately, and you don't, there's often going to be arguments because you and the others aren't even on the same conversation. Perhaps you can relate. This is not a moral issue. This is a deficit in skills that weren't learned or mastered for whatever reason and still can be learned, and they need to. And if you're willing to invest the time, effort, and energy, it's doable. It's important to not assume that you or anyone else has the capacity to do things that seem simple enough, like communicate skillfully. If you or others don't yet know how to do something, it doesn't make sense to punish or blame or get upset, because none of those responses are empowering or supportive. Rather, get busy identifying and filling in the existing gaps. And remember, making a mistake doesn't make you a failure. You only failed to achieve an outcome, which is behavioral. But you, as the person, aren't a failure, which is identity or essence. Your value is still intact as a human being. I'm a work in progress just like you. I failed to know how to get all the active links into the episode description until this one. Yet I figured it out, and now the information is there. It's just part of the adventure of life. There's no point in playing the blame game. Better to get solutions-oriented and figure things out. So be a student of your own life, remain teachable, and you're going to move from stuck to unstoppable too. We're getting closer to today's 3 important points with relevant stories, an action step, and a favorite quote of mine. So let's keep going. I want you to remember that you are not what you do or don't do. You are more than that. That we are not defective or less than as people, as human beings. We're just wired differently. And that difference is actually pretty cool once you have the tools that you need for your own success. And in this case, it's you discovering whatever pre-skills or skills you might be missing, being open to learning and mastering them so you can skillfully communicate and enjoy greater happiness and success in your life. Remember, this is a process with many, many important parts. So please don't let yourself off the hook here by skipping over 1 or 2 steps, not getting the results that you hope for, and stopping there. Seriously, if you didn't have the benefit of learning this stuff when you were growing up, you can't expect yourself to master it overnight. Well, you can expect it, but that would be really silly. Each piece of this process builds on what comes before it. So don't skip anything looking for a shortcut. There just aren't any if you want to master skillful communication. It takes lots and lots of practice to become your new automatic behavior, and it is so worth it. In this episode, I'm going to help you to see where or why your communication has been less than skillful and what you can do starting today to turn those outcomes around, as well as feel better about yourself. How much time do we have? Not much. So let's get to it. Today's 3 important points are the impact of ADHD and executive function deficits on skillful communication, assertive, not aggressive communication, including literal and inferential information, and the importance of boundaries in providing and receiving communication.
This podcast is sponsored by Pure Potential with Dr. B. You can head over to drbarbaracohen.com and find the podcast show notes, great free content from Dr. B, plus programs and services. That's drbarbaracohen.com.
Now back to being an adult with ADHD in today's world. It's almost story time, but first, you need a win. You need to remember and acknowledge and celebrate at least one thing that's good about you or has gone right for you today. Just one thing. Perhaps you shared a win in the community group. That's a win. Or maybe you completed a task that you've never completed before. Certainly a win. Or perhaps you gave up a bad habit. That's definitely a win. Whatever you choose is up to you. However, I want you to choose something right now and celebrate it, either aloud or to yourself. I want you to have a win, and I want you to acknowledge that at least one thing has gone right in your day and is right about you, even if you have lots to learn before you can become an effective communicator. So what? That doesn't take away from the fact that at least one thing has gone right today or is right with you. You are a precious child of the universe, and you're called a human being, not a human doing, for good reason. You don't have to earn your value. You were born with it. Your value comes from who you are, not what you do. Got it? The reasons why you don't have skillful communication yet aren't as important as your willingness to be a student of your own life so that you can determine which skills you have, which skills you need to learn. I'm going to share 3 stories with you, as well as talk about your responsibility in this, since you're not off the hook here. I hope at least one of these stories is going to resonate with you and be of benefit. So let's keep going. Shifting gears to our first story. Conrad had been down on himself for years. In writing, he was a fair communicator. It's because he could take all the time that he wanted to craft his message. In fact, he often spent hours on an email or a letter, whether for work or a friend. He wanted to be careful to say exactly what he wanted to say and not be misunderstood. He thought he was taking every precaution to avoid hurt or misunderstanding. The problem, of course, is that Conrad didn't have any control over how other people were going to take or interpret what he said in writing. He could labor for hours and feel that he got it just right and then send it off, only to be greeted with a response that he just didn't expect and not a positive one. It was because of Conrad's challenges with attention, memory, thinking, and reasoning that it took an enormous amount of time, effort, and energy to give birth to just one message. Conrad was so focused on the words he was using to express his message that he was missing what his message was lacking. His focus was so narrow and hyper-focused that he didn't create the mental space to consider more than just the facts. He didn't know how to establish rapport with the people that he was writing to. He was mostly focused on getting his point across clearly. Some of his emails were 2 to 3 pages long and took a long time to get to the point. Sometimes he never really did get to the point with any clarity for others. And because he took so long to craft his written communication, many people were annoyed with him because they needed the information quickly and couldn't get him to move faster to provide it. He felt overwhelmed and stressed when he was pushed to produce more quickly. It was a similar experience for him as demand language when he was asked to speak and respond. He just couldn't respond well on demand. His brain just shut down, and he couldn't access the information that he knew that he had, but it was just out of his reach. Conrad was hearing what his coworkers were saying to him, but he couldn't comply and didn't really understand the meaning of their communication and how their lives were being impacted by his actions. Some background facts. Communication is a huge part of our lives. Every relationship depends on it, and it often seems to go wrong, especially when ADHD or executive function deficits are present. Some of these general tips for skillful communication are really challenging for those with ADHD or executive function deficits, yet they're very, very important. Who you are matters. What you say matters. What you do matters. Noticing and strengthening your supportive habits and watching out for those that aren't. Using meditation and mindfulness to create the necessary space in your own mind to communicate skillfully. Improving your speaking skills. Finding the right time and being willing to tell the truth about when that is so that everyone's needs can be met. Empathy and rapport is essential when you're connecting with another person. Clearly identify what's really important in what you're saying and stay focused there. Reduce input and say only what needs saying. Keep it brief. Be truthful so that you don't have to remember a bunch of little lies. And express kindness and gratitude for others' presence in the communication. It's a gift. Improving your listening skills. There's a difference between hearing and listening, a huge difference. We perceive with our ears or we hear words with our auditory system. We listen to complete messages using our cognitive functions of attention, memory, thinking, and reasoning. You see where I'm going? Barriers to effective listening with ADHD and executive function deficits that have to be overcome are distractions, both the internal and the external ones. Misinterpretations because of processing things incorrectly, and attachments to our opinions that need to be right that so many people have. Active listening is engaged listening, and it's kind of on a spectrum. First is repeating, which is just saying what you heard said. Next is paraphrasing what was said, which is your summary of what you heard that the other person said. And then there's reflecting what was said, which is putting into your own words what it is that you got out of what you heard them say. If you relate to Conrad's story, your action step has 3 parts. Focus on identifying what the real or the underlying problems are so you can get to some real solutions. Follow through on addressing the underlying problems with a trained professional if needed so you can develop skills and resolve emotional issues and build your self-esteem. Self-management of your feelings about the years of struggling with these challenges and all the people that you unintentionally hurt, including yourself. Cultivating a deep well of empathy and forgiveness is going to be important to the healing process here. Transitioning to our next story. When Laura had her style of taking an information assessed, she scored 50-50, which means that she takes in a double load of information in every communication exchange as a listener. She's getting both the literal and the inferential input. And as the speaker, she's processing both the literal and inferential messages that she wants to convey to others, so she has a double load there as well. No wonder she feels overwhelmed in every communication situation, and she reacts aggressively. She's just trying to get away from so much information, and her aggressiveness is her only defense to push the entire stimulus load away from her. It's clear that people don't respond well to her aggressiveness, and she knows that being assertive is a much healthier and more respectful way to go, but she just hasn't been able to manage her emotional load well enough to make that transition possible. Some background facts. A few differences between being aggressive and being assertive. Being aggressive in your communication is being reactive. It's like being a bulldozer and just pushing over everything and everyone that's in the way. That you're only considering your own needs when you're being aggressive, not anyone else's. With assertive communication, it's responsive. It's considering your needs and others' needs at the same time. It's respectful, and it's nonviolent. You know, my favorite book for learning assertive expression is Your Perfect Right. Assertiveness and Equality in Your Life and Relationships by Alberti and Edmonds. It's now in its 10th edition, and it's available for the first time this year on Kindle, if you like that kind of thing. And it's packed with step-by-step exercises, tips, and skills to help you express yourself effectively. If you relate to Laura's story, your action step has 3 parts. Focus on noticing what triggers you to communicate with aggression instead of being assertive. Follow through on unpacking those situations where you get triggered into aggressive communication and determine what you're fighting for or fighting against in those situations so that you're going to be able to work it through and resolve those issues. Self-management of your feelings of needing to protect yourself with aggression, and gently allow yourself to step into considering the needs of others and yourself, both at the same time, in each and every situation that you engage in so that you can make the emotional transition to respectful communication. Transitioning to our next story. After years of a challenging marriage, Tim and Marge were at their wits' end. It's not that they had forgotten their love for each other or what attracted them years ago. They were just having a hard time setting aside all the hurts of the past and establishing personal boundaries, both as individuals and as a married couple, and sticking with these healthier ways of relating when they communicated without getting triggered or getting aggressive. They knew they needed some professional help with setting aside the hurts of the past, and they sought it, because as hard as they tried, they kept bringing those hurts into their life today. In their first couple session, they learned what it means to fully let go of something and truly forgive, which doesn't mean liking what happened, rather to choose to stop punishing each other and themselves with the events of the past. They learned how to cut ties with their past, take the lessons they learned with them, and move on. They knew they could move forward now with setting up boundaries and practicing respectful communication because of the weight of the past hurts had been resolved. Some background facts. Boundaries are indicators of where you begin and end as a person, so to speak. They can also indicate the space or the shape of a relationship, the borders or the limits. And the purpose of boundaries is to protect something, not to prohibit it. Boundaries can be considered as guidelines for what is and isn't acceptable in a communication exchange, how you will express yourself, and how you're willing to receive communication in order to protect both yourself as an individual and the coupleship. Within the confines of the coupleship, boundaries could refer to the lines that define and protect individuals. Boundaries also help people understand the friction points in their relationship and move beyond them to the mutual love and care, respect, and intimacy of a sacred union. People who don't respect another's boundaries have a basic attitude towards life that they should be able to do what they want to do, kind of an immature and self-serving attitude. Some examples of boundaries might be being intentional about taking care of your relationship, speaking directly to each other about a problem rather than to others, not allowing others to speak negatively about your beloved, rather to protect them and have their back, to not keep secrets from each other because it limits the intimacy that you can experience, to not speak rudely or shout at each other, which can be verbally abusive, to not be physically hurtful to each other, to work together as a team, to do what's best for the relationship, and when facing a decision, to ask yourself if it's going to help the relationship and how, and if not, then don't do it. To decline invitations from family or friends that's hurtful to your relationship. These are some examples of what boundaries might be in a relationship. If you relate to Tim and Marge's story, your action step has 3 parts. Focus on what the challenges are and whether or not you can resolve them on your own. Follow through on seeking professional help as needed to resolve specific issues, and then continue to work together on practicing setting and respecting healthy boundaries for your relationship and your communication. Self-management of your feelings about the boundaries of your beloved. See them as protection for them and for your relationship, rather than a wall that you need to try and tear down or push through. You know, it takes courage to look at the truth of your life and accept what you find. And acceptance isn't resignation. It's starting with what is and moving forward from there. A favorite quote of mine, Jim Rohn said, "If you just communicate, you can get by. But if you communicate skillfully, you can work miracles." The question I have for you at this point of our journey together is, are you ready to upgrade your communication from just okay to skillfully? I hope so. It's a step into having a deeper connection with yourself and with others, and it is totally worth it. Since everyone learns differently and has preferences for how they learn best, I've created many different resources with you in mind. And I have a win to share. I learned how to put all the resource information and live links in the episode description. Wow! Hard to believe that it's taken me 30 episodes to figure this out, and it takes what it takes. So here's what's available. This podcast show with show notes for each episode, the Harness Your ADHD Power community on Facebook, live videos on my Facebook page, Adventures in Achievement. Ask me your questions for an episode. Reach out to me with your thoughts or feedback. A quick survey to tell me what you're struggling with. A free video and an ebook about getting your ADHD needs met. A free tips ebook on decision making. And my innovative online program, Adventures in Achievement. New enrollment opens again on August 15th, so get yourself on the wait list now if you want to receive additional information this week to know if this might be right for you. Like I said, all the resource links are now in the episode description as well as on my website. Be sure to take advantage of everything that I continue to generate for you with you in mind. And please reach out to me directly if there's something else that you'd like to see as a resource or something that you'd like to tell me about this show and what would work even better for you. I really do want to hear from you because your needs matter to me. If I'm going to make a significant difference in your lives, I need to know what your frustrations are and what you need. So no matter how you choose to have me serve your needs, it's an honor to accompany you on your journey and make a difference in the quality of your life. I appreciate you showing up to listen today and in the future. New episodes are released on Mondays and Thursdays, and as a subscriber, the newest episode will be in your feed by 1 a.m. Pacific time, plus you won't miss out on anything extra that I create. Certainly a good reason to subscribe. Remember to check the Ask Dr. B episodes for answers to your questions if you asked any of me, or just enjoy all the episodes, where I'll be talking about such compelling topics as what it takes to make good decisions, excelling in the workplace, and the purpose of setting realistic goals. If you enjoyed today's episode or any of the other episodes, please share this podcast show with your friends and family, as well as rate the show. And if you'd like to do a little more, write a thoughtful review on iTunes so I know that I'm meeting your needs. It doesn't have to be anything lengthy, just a line or two about how the podcast is helping you. That is, if it is. I love hearing from you and learning how the podcast show is benefiting you and those that you care about. It means a lot to me to know that your life is getting a little bit better every time we get together. So if you want to download the show notes or access additional resources and services, you'll find the links in the description and on my website. That is, if that's of interest to you. Thanks for listening. Until the next time, bye for now.
Thanks for your undivided attention. If you're hungry to make positive changes in your life, head over to drbarbaracohen.com and see how Dr. B can help you today. Whether you love making changes with one-to-one attention and community support, or on your own with self-study, or could benefit from coaching or psychotherapy, you'll find all the information right there at drbarbaracohen.com.